Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. And as always, I promise a robust conversation. I'm pleased today to be in conversation with an esteemed elder in our community and in the world. His name is Chairman Omali Yeshitela. He's 83 years old. He's a leader of the African People's Socialist Party and of the Uhuru Movement. He's a political theorist, a strategist. He developed a theory of African internationalism. He's traveled to over 17 countries building Black power struggle awareness, consciousness throughout Africa, Europe, and the Americas, establishing solidarity relations with other colonized peoples' movements. And he's driven the establishment of over 50 Black community economic institutions designed to free African people from the colonial mode of production. We got a lot to talk about before we, well, Chairman, first of all, welcome to the conversation. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Brother Al. I cannot overstate the significance it is for me to be here with you. Thank you so much, comrade.
One of the things we'll do in and out of the conversation is talk about your recent and ongoing and unfinished case. You've been charged by the Department of Justice and actually are awaiting a sentencing in a case that is interesting. I'm going to have you walk us through that case. I've got the background information, but that's the basis for the, I believe, the Hands Off campaign that we're going to talk about as well. Before we go into more background, let me ask you just to lay out a statement of who you are, what your mission is, and where you stand at this moment on the mission you've been assigned in your lifetime.
As you mentioned, I'm Omali Yeshitela. I'm the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and the leader of the International Uhuru Movement. We exist throughout the world, several places on the continent of Africa, in Germany, in France, in England, and African communities in various places in Europe, and inside the United States and the Caribbean. So I became involved in organizationally in politics in the 1960s as a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, as it was characterized. That's the organization that represented the bridge between the anti-racism civil rights movement and the anti-colonial Black Power movement. And it was SNCC that introduced to public discourse the whole demand for Black Power, the Black Power slogan demand. And so I was a part of that. And in the 1966, I was arrested in St. Petersburg, Florida, for leading a demonstration to the city hall there that tore down an 8x10 mural that had been hanging there since the 1930s that had African people in caricature with, in the typical caricature, long extended limbs, pink lips over most of the face and what have you. And after asking the government to take it down several times, they refused to do it. In a demonstration, I led a demonstration and we tore the mural down from the wall. I was arrested. I was charged with 11 offenses at the time. I ended up with one of those charges being a felony that resulted in a 5-year prison sentence. So I did something like 2.5 years in and out of prison because I would get appeal bond and things like that based on that charge. Mm-hmm. And it was while I was there that we also developed an organization called the Hunter of Militant Organizations. And the objective was to try to unite all of this, so as we were characterized at the time, militant organization that distinguished us from the organizations that pacifists and things like that in the community. And so we pulled this together, and it was called JOMO. And it was based on our assumption that Jomo Kenyatta was the leader of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, which was called Mau Mau. It was a false assumption, but he was a militant who was jailed, and so we built Jomo to try. An objective was to try to pull all around the country all of these organizations like that together. And it was through working with Jomo that and being in and out of prison. I was in and out of prison of that and other charges they made against me. I was arrested in Gainesville, Florida. I was out of prison on bond for something like 8 days, and I caught a Greyhound bus to go to Gainesville, Florida, because there were young Africans who were locked up in jail there due to protests, Black Power related kind of protests. This was something that was sweeping the country, and I was sort of considered the leader of the Black Power movement in the state of Florida. So they had asked me to come. So they asked me 4 days after I got out, I decided to go, and 8 days after that, on a Greyhound bus to Gainesville, Florida. When I got off the bus, I learned that King had been assassinated. So with the assassination of King, the entire mood of the demonstration changed. And so they arrested me in Gainesville, Florida for inciting to riot. And this is despite the fact that no riot occurred. They said it didn't have to be a riot. I just wanted there to be a riot when I spoke and what have you. So they locked me up for inciting to riot. So I was locked up there for a month. And then I got out of jail on bond. This is now 2 bonds I'm on. I'm on the bond, the appeal bond. Now I'm on another bond from Gainesville, Florida. So I'm out of jail for about 6 hours. And what happened is that the sanitation workers, remember King was killed due to his participation in the sanitation workers movement in Memphis. So this movement was happening in various places. And in St. Petersburg, Florida, the sanitation workers drove and blocked the gates and said, no, they were all Africans, said no trucks are rolling until we get a better deal. So when the sanitation workers were blocked it, I'm out now for 6 hours on bond. I get rearrested because the attorney general in the state of Florida had gone and got my bondsman to come off my bond so that I couldn't get back to St. Petersburg, Florida. And so I'm rearrested. I'm there now for something like half a month. I'm trying to get out to get back to St. Petersburg, Florida. And so I got out something like half a month later. Then I had to escape Gainesville. I literally had to escape out. There's a university there that I had somebody drive me to the university, and I got off. I got to the university, got out of the car, and then ran through the maze of corridors and things in the university. And there was another car waiting for me in another place. I got out, went into the other car, and on the back of on the floor of the back of the car, I escaped Gainesville. And anyway, from that point on, we began to organize. We organized, as I mentioned, Jomo, and we concluded a while, and not too much longer, that just protest organizing wasn't enough, that we had to really concentrate on the actual capture and wielding political power. And then we determined that the best vehicle for doing that was a political party. So we created the African People's Socialist Party during this entire process. So that's something of the history of my involvement and how I happen to be here right now.
Fascinating. Thank you for that story, a great story. Thanks to Leah Fifield for your note. She says it's exciting to hear from Chairman Omali. Thanks for this important interview. Also, thanks to Almost Alkaline, who before this show was waiting patiently for the interview. Those others who are watching.
I think Leah Fifield is there in Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken. She's a part of the Solidarity Movement here.
Awesome.
There.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Leah, reach out to me and jump in the conversation if you wish. And anybody else that's connected on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube, love to have your comments. Shout us out. Shout out where you are watching from. and encourage your friends to connect to this conversation. Send a tweet or post a message to your network. Tell people this conversation is going on right now and that they ought to be a part of it as well. So the story, Chairman, is one of arrest, challenge, arrest, challenge, arrest, challenge. It's one of work. And so the work, as you describe it, is what? How do you capitalize? And I'm listening for your reflection on 80 plus years, right, of being in the field. How would you describe the work so far? And that question leads me to where I want to go, and that is, what do you see as the work that lies ahead?
Well, actually, Brother Al, I am a revolutionary. I have been for a very long time. And one becomes a revolutionary at that juncture where it becomes clear that there can be no resolution of the contradictions that we're facing inside within the social system. That we have to have a different relationship to the social system, that our struggle has to be for power. And we have to have power over our own lives. And we have to do that as a part of a process of negating the power and influence of our oppressors. And so that's what we do. And we also came to an understanding a long time ago that the struggle of African people for liberation has run into its limitations when based simply on the borders of Africa, the borders existing here and every place else. We've been forcibly dispersed as an African people at gunpoint. Mm-hmm. And while there are people who came to America who came looking for a better way of life and actually got a better way of life, the fact is that African people did not come here looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of being brought here at gunpoint. So our objective has to be to liberate ourselves. And in the process of liberating ourselves, we recognize the fact is that the indigenous peoples of this country, who don't even get mentioned unless they're in the room, and sometimes don't get mentioned then, these are the true custodians of this land. And that the twin pillars of the system in this country, the system rests upon the twin pillars of stolen black labor and stolen land of the indigenous peoples here. And then from our perspective, it is colonialism. And it is a colonialism that came about during a time where Europe emerged and was born, came into existence, was developed through this process of taking a land and actually some 600 years ago when Portugal, tiny Portugal that had nothing about it that was essential at the moment until in 1415, it went into Africa, it went into the Canary Islands, it took that land and initiated the whole process of stealing black people and dispersing us again at gunpoint against our will. It is the basis for there being what we call America today. It is the basis for what we even call places like Venezuela and all of these other territories throughout the Americas. And it is the basis for the unification of a group of people who prior to this process were identified themselves primarily in relationship to each other as tribes, as warring tribes of people. They identified themselves primarily in relationship to each other, Goths and Celts and all of this. And the thing that brought it all together was when they reached out and began to attack us, Africans and other people. And this is how they consolidated themselves into a single identifying people, united around a single predatory economic basis of the theft of land, the theft of resources and what have you, and the creation of what we now call Americans. In fact, Europe was born out of that process. There was no such thing as Europe before then. There was no Europe. Except some Arabs may have considered this place the northwest of
Asia, Northwest Asia.
Anyway, not Egypt, but anyway, there was no Europe. The Europe got invented as a part of that process, and so did the black man. The white man got invented. The white man invented himself, and then invented us as his antipode. so this is the process that brought it all together. This is the foundation of the whole social system from our perspective. And this is what we call a colonial mode of production. It's colonialism that gave rise to all of that. This is how we get identified as where we live. Karl Marx talked about, he characterized this process of trying to explain the rise of capitalism. He had to, because everybody knows that anybody going into business, you have to have startup capital. So the question was, where did this capitalism start? And so he said that capitalism came about as a consequence of transforming Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. He said it happened as a consequence of interring the indigenous people in this land that we call the Americas into the mines, bringing up gold and silver, and to the war that was being made against the East Indias, what we call India, and that part of Southern Asia and whatever. This is the beginning. That's colonialism. He called it primitive accumulation of capital. That was colonialism. And that's the foundation of the whole social system. And so every time black people and people in all these other places get involved in trying to win our freedom, it shakes the entire foundation. That's why I look at all the wars and threats of wars that's happening around the world today. It's around that, or it's around competition between great powers about who's going to get what of those lands, Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world. That's the foundation. And so that's the work that we've been doing. And so we believe that we are living in a period now of a profound crisis, that the political and economic configuration of the planet Earth is something that's just changed right before our very eyes. And you see it sometime in the place of in the form of the relationships that you see happening with China and the Silk Road, and you see it in terms of the relationship China, Russia, what they call South Africa, and all these other entities coming together, creating economic competition. And you see it in the relationship of the work that we do. The work that we do here, where we've created 50 some odd economic development projects of our own, independent of the United States. And this represents a negation of the authority of the power of colonialism. And that's why they've attacked us. But that's also a testimony to the weakness of a social system that brags about how it represents, it's the shining city on the hill where freedom and democracy and free speech and Bill of Rights and all of those things dominate, and they have to attack their Bill of Rights because we never had any. Because when the Bill of Rights was ratified by the United States Congress in 1791, African people were property. There was no presumption that we had any rights at all. In fact, it was said more explicitly in 1857 when the Supreme Court ruled that black people had no rights that a white man had to respect. That was 1857 where the Supreme Court ruled that. And that was never overturned by the Supreme Court. The only thing that happened was the Civil War occurred between 1857, 1865. And this is the time where you see this legislation, that supposedly brought some kind of freedom to African people and else. So it's a real shaky foundation that they're resting on, because every place in the world, they built this whole social system on a fault line of oppression, of colonialism. And every time people struggle against it, the foundation shakes. That's why you see economic crisis happening everywhere. Russia didn't do it. China didn't do it. And despite the fact of what we see happening with Russia and China, what did it was Venezuela. What did it was Afghanistan. What did it was all these other people, Cuba. Every place black people and oppressed people are colonized and we struggle. It sets all kinds of things in motion, including the competition between the powers who presume to rule the world and don't pay much attention to us in that fashion. And so anyway, that's what it's about. And that's why they want to shut us up. They don't want us to talk. They want to keep us isolated, because the presumption of colonialism, and this is the thing that they sell all the time, is that they don't colonize us. They don't do these things to us to hurt us. They're doing it to help us. The presumption is that even when this whole democracy that came about as a consequence of the rise of capitalism and the invention of the white man, they talked about how all of this was based on democracy. And then they had to explain, how the hell can you be talking about democracy and democratic rights and Rousseau and all these other people who talked about democracy for Europe and white people were the people you control in Africa, the people you control all others, but they don't have democracy. So they came up with an exception. And the exception was that they don't have democracy now because we're in the process of bringing them into a state of civilization. When they achieve civilization, then they can have democracy. That was the logic, and it was not just something I'm saying. That there were actual debates among philosophers at this time of Europe around this whole question. And so this is where you get the whole thing of Rudyard Kipling, the white man's burden, that we don't want to do this. We don't want to control black people all around the world. We don't want to control the indigenous people, but it's our burden.
It's
Because
fallen to us.
That's of civilization and Christianity, and we got to share it with everybody around the world, whether they like it or not.
So now, Brother Chairman, the cover has been pulled off, and all of the BS is being looked at as pure BS.
Yes.
And we look at the events such as the founding of this country. They call them the patriarchs and the founding fathers, but others can view them as a criminal enterprise. Even in the context of their own cultural reality, they were a criminal organization trying to resist the power of their own landlords, their own sponsors, the crown, and of European power and money. And so this was a band of crooks that said we could keep this money for ourselves. Why pay them, right? And from that, the lie that they continue to embellish and grow. So how do we, number one, figure out how to provide a truer, a better, a different narrative and analysis that keeps us from being blinded by the allure of their story, and that allows us to see a truth about who we are relative to them and everybody else, and gives us a clear picture of what we must do to create a future in which we win. Our winning will not come from them.
It will not. And I think
we can't expect it.
That's right.
But they want us to believe that if we buy into the permanence of their genius, then we will eventually catch a crumb that will give us freedom. That is not the case.
That is not the case. And I think
how do we move this discussion?
I think you touched upon a very critical factor about any power in the world. Has to believe that its rule is just and that its rule is permanent. And if they don't believe that the rule is permanent, then they couldn't do some of the stuff they do to people. I mean, they'd be, shaking in their boots. But increasingly, they are faced with the likelihood or probability or possibility that it's not permanent. Mm-hmm. And increasingly, they are faced with the fact that it's not just. And it means that they corrupt themselves more and more every day. Sometimes they don't pretend to believe it's just. They just say, we got the power and we're going to exercise the power and keep people living as you do. Our objective is not to win the system to unity with our struggle. Our objective is to win our people. And our objective is to take the issue of freedom that they herald so much, and the issue of democratic rights, free speech, Bill of Rights. We love the Bill of Rights. We love the First Amendment. We also love the Second Amendment. All of these things that they said they created for themselves, not for us. And so this is what we took to court with us when they charged us with being Russian agents. How are you going to charge me with being a Russian agent? So they can't say that they are locking us up because of free speech. They say it's not that you said something we don't like. You said it, but just because the Russians told you to say it, that's why we are locking you up. That's why we're putting in prison. And what they're trying to do is obscure the reality that it's a major assault on speech. Everything they charged us with in the case that we have faced has revolved around speech. And that's their dilemma, not ours. Because the Constitution was not written for me. The First Amendment was not written for me. It wasn't written for Mexicans and indigenous people. It was written for them, which means that when they attack free speech, no matter if they say they're attacking it because of something I said, Mexicans said, they're attacking the free speech that it presumptively belongs to white people. And so what we are doing is we are taking this issue of free speech, Bill of Rights, etc., and shoving it down their throats. We're not saying unite with us because you believe in the revolution. We say you have to believe in what you said. Your Constitution gives me the right to have my own belief, to be able to say and believe what I believe in, and that's what we're not going to let you off the hook with that. So the whole movement we are building, that's one aspect of it. The other thing is that the way we concluded a long time ago that you don't talk yourself out of colonialism, you decolonize. You don't wait until after the revolution has happened. You use the process of decolonization as a means by which you capture your own political power. So that's why these programs, we live in St. Louis right now, I do. And one of the places they attacked us is in St. Louis. And they attacked us because we have initiated a program here in St. Louis called Black Power Blueprint, where we have taken, under the leadership of the Deputy Chair, Omali Yeshitela, we have transformed so much of North St. Louis that has been put into what they characterize a let it rot process. It is, I forgot exactly the term they use, benign neglect. So this is supposed to just waste. You come to St. Louis, you will see something that looks like it's been bombed out in much of North St. Louis. It looks, the people talking about, we say something about Ukraine, there's a war going on. They show you pictures of Ukraine with war. We show you pictures of St. Louis where they haven't declared war, and you will see these bombed out spaces. But something like blocks of areas in St. Louis, we have transformed it. That now people, we have created things like food, farmers markets. We have brought process through which African people come together and sell and buy from each other, where we can create economic activity, negating. The thing is to negate the ability, the power of the colonizer by placing that power in our own hands, feed, clothe, and house ourselves. They said St. Louis is a food dozen. We said, no, it's a power dozen. We get the power, we get the food. And that's how we start getting the power, organizing the people and things like that. This is part of the reason they attacked us. But you mentioned the question of all local politics. All politics is what? Local. Is that how I think you characterize it? And what we have here, they attack us in St. Louis. They come with all these bogus charges about they attacked us in St. Louis. But in St. Louis, you have a situation where this NGA, this national global, some kind of global intelligence apparatus. This is here in St. Louis. They've taken something like 1,000 acres of land in the Black community, territory in the Black community. They push people out using the power of eminent domain. They're putting this international spy thing there. They have one already in Washington, D.C. It's the third largest installation in Washington, D.C. Is this national global intelligence agency there. And these are the entities that control the satellites, even your discussions that you have on cell phones and stuff like that. And they control these drones that's being used to kill people in Palestine, to kill people in Africa, and also spy on people inside this country. So they have taken 1,000 acres and they have another plan for another 1,000 acres, pushing Black people out of the community and what have you. And then here we are taking this property, transforming this property, fighting them around this property, putting the ability of African people to live, et cetera, here, and then challenging the NGA as well. That's part of the problem that we have. So people don't understand our own significance as a people and our own community, the significance of our community, because what happens? They just use this NGA and they attacked us because of our opposition to their thing on Ukraine. But look at what they've just done. They have used this Ukraine issue to send weapons, to send long-range missiles into Russia. They have used this intelligence apparatus to put a bomb and kill a general right there in Moscow. And so if they're using this stuff, they're creeping closer and closer to possible nuclear conflagration. And if the Russians or anybody else intends to hit them strategically, where are they going to hit them at? They're going to hit this NGA in the Black community in St. Louis. they're going to do a similar thing like in Washington, D.C., et cetera. And this is the stuff that we are talking about. It is all politics, is local politics. And they would confuse our community by helping us by forcing us or contributing to our presumption of our own insignificance. It's just us. They can't be significant if it has to do with us and that kind of thing. So we're fighting them there, but our objective is to win freedom. And once you know what that objective is, you always say, to what end? When we came, one of the things that brought us to St. Louis was the murder, was the resistance that came off the murder of Mike Brown in 2014. When they gunned this kid down and blew his brains out and left them rotting on Canfield Drive, left them in 100+ degree asphalt for 4.5 hours there, as a lesson to all the Black people that this is what happens to you when you resist. And the people on Canfield Drive and Black people came and rose up and had this magnificent rebellion. And they held that long enough. They held it long enough before Jesse Jackson could get in, before Al Sharpton could get in, and pray the people out of existence, this movement out of existence. The masses rose up, and that's the thing that took us and brought us here. And the only question that we raise all the time is people demonstrating. We say, but to what end? You must have something you're fighting for. You just not demonstrate forever. It's like being on a treadmill. You can run and you can max the speed. You're on the treadmill. You never go anywhere. You get all sweaty and you feel like you're going somewhere, but you're not. So we said, to what end? And we began to organize and pull together actual organization on the ground, built organization, built relationships with the people, in other organizations in our community. And that's where these programs and projects that we're talking about came from. And that's why they're attacking us. So the way out of this is to get out of it.
And as I was saying before, all politics is local, but now we also know that the local is global.
Yes, indeed.
And global is local. So being local doesn't mean being isolated. Being local and conscious means understanding that what's happening in your body, in your family, in your community, your culture, your neighborhood is happening a million times everywhere else on the planet.
Yes.
And it's the same principle, the same process, the same objective, that objective being freedom.
That's it.
And dignity.
And dignity.
On our terms, as we understand it, as we define it, and not as a figment of somebody else's imagination or as a reflection of their presumed power to define who we are and what we think, because as they do that, it's always in relation to their supremacy. We reject
it.
Supremacist thought and supremacist products. And so that's the question. The second part of the question then, brother Chairman, was going forward. Where do we decolonize our minds and then decolonize our activities and replace them with a set of principled engagements among each other that strengthen our ability to cohere, to be cohesive, but to move with vitality into a future that resists the oppression and the effort to deny and destroy.
Yes.
Our focus, as I see it, is not to go after them.
That's
it's
right.
to go after us.
That's right.
And to find out how we can discover and become who we truly are. Does that make sense at all?
It makes sense. And somebody once said, and we've believed this for the longest period of time, that our movement is not about destroying anybody or anything. It is about building. If you hear people who bullet mouth all the time and they're going to shoot this and blow up this, etc., that's all you hear from them. Well, where are you going? Even if you were successful in shooting and burning, what's the objective of it? And so, revolution is made by revolutionaries. People do have rebellions and things like that, and we don't condemn rebellions. Believe me, we don't condemn rebellions. We believe that they have something to teach the people as well. But then what? So you have a rebellion, you have repression. Then what? If it has to be something that leads us toward an end that is the one that we desire, the one that we want, the one that's good for our people. So hopefully you can sort of keep me disciplined right now in this part of the discussion, because when they attacked us from the very first, well, before they attacked us, I think one of the reasons they attacked us is because we had.
Let me share my notes first, and then have you take it from there.
Surely.
And so my notes indicate that you were charged with acting as a Russian agent.
Yes.
Found guilty of conspiring to act as a Russian agent, but not guilty. Well, there are two things, right? Contradiction. You were found not guilty as acting as Russian agents, then also guilty of conspiring to act. So that's a distinction there.
Yes.
And the DOJ really attacked you based on speeches, petitions, printing articles, attending conferences, testifying at UN hearings,
running people for office.
Yeah. And so all of that led to them going after you. So that's the little background. You can tell the full story.
Yeah, I think that's really important. As I said, it's very difficult for them to justify attacking us, because we put, for the first time in the history of this country, we had people who ran for office in little St. Petersburg, Florida, on a reparations platform. Reparations. And then another, we had two candidates. One, Jesse Neville, who is a white guy, who is also was one of the Uhuru three, who ran for mayor. St. Petersburg, Florida is something like 18% African population. And so his campaign was based on unity through reparations. And Akilia Nai, who at one time was one of the unindicted co-conspirators, she ran for city council on the project of anti-gentrification project of make the Black community, South Side, Black again. And so this was what the campaigns were about. These were the themes of the campaign and what have you. So one of the things that the indictment charged is Russian interference, because they said the Russians were responsible for that. The Russians paid for it. The Russians were responsible for it. Although in the trial, when questioned, the lead FBI agent said, no, there was no evidence of any Russian interference, no evidence of that at all. And more explicitly, they said that when we ran a campaign against genocide, based on the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide from 1948. And you are probably aware that shortly after that convention was passed by the United Nations, Black people showed up at the United Nations. Paul Robeson was a part of that, William Patterson, and other people with a whole document indicting the United States. We charged genocide. There's a book now. You can Google it and get the book. That was in 1951 or 52. The government said that the Russians were responsible for us putting forth the genocide convention, this genocide petition, that they are the ones who invented this thing about genocide. That's 1948. It came in the United Nations. 1952, we had Africans who were doing, went to the United Nations based on that as well. They said that I went to Moscow. And because I went to Moscow attending conferences twice, and one of them was a conference having to do with immigration issues of people all around the world, international conference.
What year was that?
That was in 2015.
Okay.
And another one was when they had this conference of people who, I forgot how it was characterized, but it was about people who were struggling for self-determination. So we went to that, and they said the Russians. That's when I became a Russian agent. They said, and they said because the Russians are the ones who used those conferences to transform us, and they paid. They said that the Russians paid all expenses, etc. And the fact is, there was an NGO, a Russian NGO, that invited us to be there as a non-governmental organization. And the only paying they did was they paid for our flights there. They paid for the hotels and the food that we ate while we were there, which is a common practice, everywhere. but they assumed that there was a bunch of people from Central Florida who's going to be sitting in a jury who wouldn't know that was common practice. And so the Russians paid for everything. So they said that, but they didn't mention the fact that in 2007, I spoke in Spain to an international conference that the Spanish government, not the NGO, an NGO that was closely associated with the Spanish government, they brought us there, and then they did pay us a handsome fee for being there. It was attended by people from all around the world, from throughout Africa, people who had formerly been part of the Spanish government, and people who have been part of the United Nations. They didn't mention that. They didn't mention the fact that I was in Ireland in 1982, shortly after the tribunal that we organized on reparations for Black people in '82 in Brooklyn, New York, using international law, including the Genocide Convention that they claim the Russians created. You understand? A response to. So none of that. They mentioned none of that stuff, but the jury got an opportunity to hear some of it, despite the fact they didn't mention it. So all of this stuff, they just piled up to just ridiculous. I was in Ireland. In 1983, and I went to Ireland in 1983, and I was there with the Irish Republican Socialist Party because at that time, Northern Ireland was under direct British colonial domination. And I was there for the same reason I was in Spain, for the same reason I was in Moscow, for the same reason I created the African People's Solidarity Committee, an organization of white people, to end the encirclement and isolation of the Black liberation movement in this country, because they don't want us to be able to talk to anybody or to rely on any relationship with anybody other than the ones who are killing us and oppressing us. And so, the Irish Republican Socialist Party, they held a national press conference while I was there. And they said they united with our call, a demand that the United States ratify the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, that it took them 40 years to ratify. They had never ratified it. And even when they did it with the caveat that the United States could not be held accountable to it unless it agreed to do it. So these are the things that they charged us with, and they did it in a fashion that tried to ignore the history of our relationship and the struggle that we've had to make all along to win support for the struggle of Black people, to keep us so that we don't remain this isolated force that people can kill and murder, with impunity. So that's part of what it is that we were doing, and the basis for some of the charges that they laid on us.
So the resolution is still not complete, right? Where does it stand right now? You mentioned it earlier, but what are the options right now?
When you say the resolution, you mean
the sentencing?
Yeah, the sentencing did happen.
It's happened, but you're appealing.
But which? Yeah, we're appealing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the sentencing happened. It was crazy because you have a jury. The jury said they are not Russian agents. They in which carried a 10-year sentence with it. Said, and in total they had me, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, the other of the Uhuru three, charged with being a Russian agents and conspiracy to be a Russian agent without notifying the Attorney General of the United States. And they carried 15 years, collectively 15-year prison sentence for each one of us, with a $250,000 fine. That's what we were facing. So the jury said,
the timing on this is this year, last year, right?
The timing of this was the attack came in July 29th of 2022. We went to a trial in September we were indicted in September, I think, of 2022, and we just went to trial in 2024. We went to trial in September 2024. And when we went to trial, the jury said that they're not guilty of being Russian agents. They disagreed. Said, no, they're not. They didn't do that. But then they convicted us for conspiring to do something that never happened. So that carried a 5-year sentence and a $250,000 fine with it. And so that was what we were faced with for a period of time, fighting against this. And then we were under near house arrests in the sense that we had to turn in our passports. We had to get permission to travel. We had to submit to home visits by armed people. We had to report once a week to some authority. That's what we were stuck with for a whole period of time, right? And so when we finally we were convicted of the lesser of the two charges, and the charges were dangerous because if they had convicted us of being Russian agents, what they would have done is criminalize African people, criticize the United States government. If you criticize the treatment of Black people, then it's not because it's anything real. They absolve themselves of anything that happens to Black people in this country. If we complain, it's because we're agents of Russia. That was the part of the objective of the whole damn thing.
And the contradiction is that we're operating out of just past an administration of Donald Trump, going back into a new one, when the question of Russia and the U.S. is totally different. So that really highlights the contradiction of that tool.
Well,
using that tool,
that's really interesting about it.
Put that against what they do and have been doing.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that as quiet as it's kept, the United States government, first of all, the charges they make against Trump is that he's somebody who denied the election outcomes and what have you. But we didn't see that coming from Trump first. It came first from Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, because they said they didn't lose the election. Russia won the election. It was Russia, Russia, Russia. They're the ones who started this whole Russian trope. The Democratic Party, Joe Biden's organization, started this whole Russian trope. So I guess the Russians just did it again with defeating Kamala Harris, as from their perspective, and it's garbage. And I'm saying this is because we're not looking for new masters in Russia, and we don't look for it in the Democratic Party, Republican Party, anything. That African people have to be free, and we have agency. And this whole notion that the Russians have to tell us that we are being killed, that what happened to George Floyd was, Russians weren't there. The Russians didn't have to be there for us to know that we are being killed, shot down like we were, here in St. Louis. There's no Russian. They would destroy this assumption that Black people have agency. You see,
there's a chat. One person in the chat, his name is Trey, says this guy is an enemy of Black American people, and he needs to be locked up. He's working with white supremacy. So I don't know who this person is, but you probably catch comments like this all the time. I want Trey to know that I see his comment. And Trey, if you've got an argument to make, send me an email. I'd love to hear what you have to say, what you mean. And you can send that to info@Insight News. Love to find out more. But when you hear comments like this, brother, what do you think?
We don't hear them that much. We really don't. We don't hear them that much. And it's some kind of knee-jerk response or some kind of response for somebody closely associated with the state. But the fact is that,
or it could be a troll. It could be some kind of troll. Yeah.
And the fact is that there are white people who work under our leadership in 140 cities in this country right now that do the work, getting reparations for African people, do the work, criticizing the genocidal attack on African people, do the work, calling for the release of Black political prisoners, do the work, saying hands off Uhuru, etc. 140 cities. And I don't know how many of those cities the person, Trey, I think you said his name was, is connected with, but we don't hear that much. I mean, every now and then something like that happens, but generally speaking, it's not the case.
Sure. So let me ask you, what does the Trump election mean for Black people, our people, both here and around the globe, from where you stand right now?
It means that another colonizer entity now presides over the system. I mean, you have left-wing colonizers and right-wing colonizers, and people want to get us on the anti-fascist trope and what have you. But the fact is that when somebody has control of your life, I mean, you don't even hear the discussion of fascism when they was killing George Floyd. Nobody's saying, look at what fascism is doing. It's only when it seems like the potential of the contradictions that colonized people face every day in our lives, the potential of that intruding into the lives of the colonizers themselves, then the fascism question comes into play. So I don't know what to expect from Trump. I know it's Biden who attacked us. I know it's Biden who just tried to give me 15 years in prison. I know it's Biden who was opposed even to the Civil Rights Bill and fought against it when he was in the Senate. I know it was Biden who was even opposed to the busing that liberals say they love so much because he didn't want his children to go to school in a jungle. I know it's Biden who put forth the crime bill, omnibus crime bill, and used William Jefferson Clinton to put 100,000 policemen in the streets, one of whom may have killed George Floyd and other people. Biden and the Democratic Party did that. So I'm looking at colonialism. And so I'm not stuck on whether it's a Democratic colonizer, a Republican colonizer, a liberal or a conservative colonizer. We live under colonial domination. I can't see a dime's worth of difference between the two of them. Our problem is our own lack of organization, our lack of ideological clarity, our lack of coherent philosophy, et cetera. And that's the thing that we've been fighting to try and create, so that we have a to what end. That we're not, we can't determine who's going to get elected next year, or whether there's even going to be a coup in this country, like January 6th, where people are defecating all on the floors and chasing the vice president down the hall, talking about hanging him and what have you. That's not us. That's a crisis inside the system that we are looking at now. So the question for us is, how do we win our own freedom, our own liberation, and not get hung up on whether it's a Trump or a Biden? The only thing different about them is their names. The fact is, or further, Kamala Harris. Please.
How do we, what's the international piece of this? You said you've traveled to, I think, 17 or so countries or African countries. What do you find, and what do you hope for? How do we, again, I'll use the term jailbreak, the understanding of the institutions of oppression that seek to normalize the supremacist story about their infallibility, when we are discovering that it is simply a Wizard of Oz creation. It's a show. Indeed. It's an act. And that is frail, and that it is folding of its own weight, but we have to help it fall, because the helping means that we simply are learning to breathe fully into our own personhood. And doing that in and of itself, understanding who we are to each other differently, and then acting, creating transactions, activity, organizations, collaboration between ourselves locally, globally. That is a difference that I think has to simply continue to be planted and nurtured. What do you think?
I think that's true. And I think that when we were attacked, subsequent to that, we've created a Hands Off Uhuru Movement. There's something like 140 different organizations that's associated with this, which is really important. And they span the political and ideological spectrum. They everybody from Scott Ritter. You may have seen Tucker Carlson. He came out in defense of us, and some people say that's even why he lost his job with Fox, because he came out twice on Fox, and a week before that mentioning our case and supporting the case. So bring as broad a sector of the population as possible in the isolation. Don't allow them to isolate us and treat us as these weird things that's a threat to basic principles that most human beings believe in. And that's what they do. They would slander us and give the impression that we are opposed to basic principles that most people believe in. Most people believe in unity. Most people believe in freedom. Most people don't want to hurt people, etc. We don't want to hurt people. We want to free people. And so I think that's really important. That's one of the reasons we also run from this whole anti-racist thing. I don't care what white people think about us. I'm not trying to change white people's opinion about us. I'm trying to hold white people to what they say they believe in, which is the Constitution, which is the First Amendment, which is the Bill of Rights, etc. That's the thing that we've been fighting for. And we are, and African people historically have been the best champions of the Bill of Rights, best champions of freedom of speech, and we had to be, because we had neither. As I mentioned, when they were ratified, we were in chains. So who would fight harder for free speech? Who would fight harder for the right to freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and Black people who had none of those rights at all? So we've always been in the forefront of that. And if you look at anything about the history of this country, like virtually every thing that's recognized as democratic in this country has come as a consequence of the struggle of Black people and for winning that. So we have, like I said, something like 140 different organizations. And 140 different organizations, not just in general, but anti-colonial. These are forces who have signed on to an anti-colonial project. They recognize that the colonial question is the primary question that we are confronted with, and people have united with that. So there are something like 140 different organizations who have united with that definition of the reality that we are looking at. And when we talk about a colonial mode of production, we're not just talking about something that happens to Black people. It's something that happens to all of us, except that Black people and indigenous people, the Mexican people, etc., we are the host to this parasite that's lashed on to us. This is a parasitic relationship that we suffer from. So the responsibility of the host is to deny the parasite any ability to feast off us. If the parasite can't feast off us, it dies. And so how do you do that is waging this struggle for democracy, begin to fight for our own capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. Of course, this is a threat. This is why they attack us, because we are doing that kind of stuff and setting that kind of example, what have you. And there was something else that I know that I wanted to mention off of the thing that you just raised in terms of your notes.
Sure. We're down to 3 minutes too, so
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. So, but you know, that's part of what I would say, and so we've been leading this struggle, and people have joined into this struggle, and we recognize that all of us are in this thing together. But the way out of it is under the leadership of the colonized people, because we are the only ones. Because the colonizers, people who are good thinking white people, etc., can be satisfied with less than my freedom. They can be satisfied with less than my freedom, less than the freedom of the Mexican people, less than the freedom of the Palestinian people. They can be satisfied. And so what we say, they got to be under our leadership so that the whole thing gets taken on. And we see that happening. We've had this magnificent organization we've been building for years and years and years, bringing colonizer people into it. We've set up an economic, people say, how are you going to get reparations? No mystery for us. We're getting reparations. We created the entity, and we've opened up the door for white people who want to participate in making reparations happen in terms of economic development in our communities.
Got a minute left. Any final words, thoughts, instructions for our listeners? Do you want to invite them to support?
Yes, I would hope
movement.
that people would go to Hands Off Uhuru, HANDS, Hands Off Uhuru, UHURU.org. And you will find about so much more than what I've been able clumsily try to provide for you right now. Go to Hands Off Uhuru. You will find all the stuff we're involved in. You get a sense of upcoming events. We got critical events right before us now. Come on to this, join this struggle, because the people on the planet Earth have to be free, and that the way to the road to socialism for those of us who are looking for that is painted black. So come on board. That's what we're asking people to do. HandsOffUhuru.org. Uhuru.
All right, listen, brother, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. Stay tuned for a second once we close out. I want to finish up some notes with you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll be here again tomorrow. And let me invite you to capture this conversation and share it to all of your networks on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook. Spread the word and be part of this conversation. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.